we will see, I guess it's probably the playing cards. Yes, of course it's the playing card. Okay, so we're gonna see what our Koa reading is for, ooh, I was gonna say, if it was 3 cards, I was about to say, what? 1, 2, any more? Okay, now a little bit more shuffling. As you can see, these are my cards from Belize. They have parrots and toucans. Oh, and there's 3. So, I have actually not read playing cards publicly, maybe ever, but I'm very excited about this. So we have our concern, we have our opportunity, our obstacle, and we have our advantage, and our aversion. Our concern is our objective reality. Our opportunity or obstacle is the way that we feel the objective reality is affecting us. And then the advantage and the aversion, our third card, is how we feel our own character and personality is suited to address what's happening inside of us. So our first card is the 9 of Diamonds, 9 of Swords. I'm a Diamonds of Swords today because it's been a swords kind of motherfucking day. But I like to call this card Lamentations. Whenever it comes up, I call it the Eeyore card. Nobody likes me. Nobody cares. I guess I'll just go home. Eeyore says to his friends who show up to his house every fucking day. So Eeyore is a fixated mind, okay? He lives in the world of his brain. And even though the environment has changed a lot from his maybe morose and lonely youth, Eeyore is still living in the past of himself. So when I see the 9 of Swords, well, one, I like it because it's one of the cards that overtly expresses crying, which I think is important, because whenever we shed tears, we're shedding beliefs. Sometimes we're shedding tears of joy because we never believed things could be so good. And sometimes we're shedding tears of sorrow because we didn't realize shit was so terrible. And typically the 9 of Swords is when things are so terrible. That being said, because it's a spectrum, it's also when the sort of facade fully falls away. Because, and Corinna and Rosella of Rise Up Good Witch and I talk about this all the time, I think the 10 of Swords is a great card. It's never depicted like that. Some of the best versions I've seen have had like 10 swords in the back of a person. I love the imagery of like suffering in that card. Because, I mean, not because when you actually feel that way, but because the reality is that by the time you get to the 10, by the time you're getting to that graduation from this archetypal energy, the 10 is this admission. I call it the medic card, you know, going to a bad place to do a good thing. When you are the medics on a battlefield, you wore white so people didn't stab your ass, but you also wore white so that it would be clear, like, I'm not picking a side here. Y'all are about to die on this field. You're not going to take yourself to the medic tent. Like, I have to come here. I don't really have a stake in this game, but I have a purpose. And so I think of the 10 of Swords as actually when we address the wound, when we've been like denying what we know is the source of the wound. Sometimes it's a big ass gaping wound in your leg. Sometimes it's your diet. Sometimes it's your nerves. And the 10 of Swords is when you finally come around to just being like, I give into this. I surrender to this recognition that I am in pain. Whereas the 9 of Swords is still like, oh my God, why me again, forever, always? And it's always been this way for me, even though it definitely hasn't. And so the concern kind of right now is a lot of people, so funny, my light in my house. It's so funny. A lot of people, I think, myself included, was saying to my friends on Marco Polo the other day that, like, I'm kind of bored with humanity in a way where I'm like, oh, okay, so they're still rolling out the same old solutions, late stage capitalism, have, make you feel better if you're not, you know, starving or dead, you know, or suffering in this way. and how that is so unsatisfactory because the idea of just like going to a job for 40 years, especially the same fucking job, and with the same people and having them pay me money seems like the worst type of life I could imagine, which is kind of amazing because it's the life my parents lived. God bless them. But now, talking to my parents as adults who are no longer, like, let's say, parenting age has been really interesting because what we see on the tail end of that decision, which seems, I think, is done because things feel so determined by the outside world. So people are like, I didn't have a choice. I had to do this. I had to slog, blah, blah, blah. But then when they get to the age where when you get older and society's like, fuck you now, don't need you as a workforce. Maybe go die somewhere quietly, please. Like when you get to that age, then you realize, well, what do I replace all that I must do with? And what you realize is that because that must do comes from a negative place and a place of critique and lamentation and depression, that like the thing you're most naturally going to replace that, let's say, authority with is the same opinion in your own community, right? Like you'll turn around, you'll try to parent more, or you'll try to find friends and give them advice instead of being like, where is your life? So I think what's interesting about the Nine of Swords is that it's confessional, it's admitting in a way that the Eight of Swords definitely isn't, in a way that the Seven of Swords definitely isn't. But it's also coming to a place where you finally realize that no matter if someone helped you there, it's you keeping yourself there. So it doesn't matter if, like, this is what people say about R. Kelly, right? Like, he was molested as a child. He became a drug addict. He was abused. And then he abused. So it's like, at some point you have to say, yes, this happened to me. And if I didn't like it, and if I'm going to complain and cry about the fact that it happened to me, then maybe I shouldn't be a part of perpetuating that behavior. Like, that's when we graduate to the Ten of Swords, which is funny because that's not what happens in this reading. Opportunity, obstacle. Eight of Swords. Denial. And also denial when the tools are actually there, which I think is hilarious because the Eight of Swords is actually the first card before I even read tarot that found me. Like my friend Courtney collects playing cards. I used to find random tarot cards, and whenever I did, it wasn't as often. Like she has like 3 decks of cards. I found like maybe 10 cards in my life, but I think 3 to 5 of those cards were the Eight of Swords until I started doing this work. And then it became the Hierophant, which I'm still in that whenever I get other card readings from other people, the Hierophant is always following me around. So that's my chapter right now, but we're in a Hierophant year. So we'll see. Next year being the Lovers. God, we'll see. So with that, with the Eight of Swords coming, to me, especially because that was a card that accompanied me earlier, what's so important about that card is all the tools to release you from the denial are at your disposal. The person is blindfolded with 8 swords behind them. Their hands are tied. And they could, first of all, ain't nobody around. There are plenty of cards where there are people around to make sure you don't, 6 of Swords, 5 of Wands. There are people around to make sure that you can't just slip off. 6 of Wands. But in the 8 of Swords, you really your own captor there. There's a castle and the traditional Rider-Waite all the way in the background. The lights are on up there. The weather is tepid. There's no storming, no tower thunderbolts. Nothing like that is happening. You just scared. You're just sitting there immobile and scared, or standing immobile and scared, and all the tools of your liberation are at your disposal, but you won't perceive them. You won't put your hands on them, and you won't walk towards them. So, and yes, viewers, this can be ableist, but I'm talking about the traditional Rider-Waite card. So it's a standing character as opposed to the Empress, who is a disabled legend in my opinion. She's always sitting. So with the 8 of Swords coming after the 9 of Swords, it's a little bit of a back, forth, and forth. And I think that's easy to do coming from September to October, because September is this month between summer and fall, and people are lamenting that the weather's going away and that isn't this permission to gallivant, as if like because kids have off the summer that we've grown up to believe that like I can get away with more in the summer, and it's okay if I take more days off of work, and even work would act that way. Like, oh, it's summer, and then fall hits, and they're like, now you must adult again. I don't understand how the seasons get associated with ages, but okay. So then you have Virgo season, fixed Earth, oh, very constructive, oh, critical things. And then we get into the Libra, and the reason that everyone forgets as soon as we hit October is because it's like, well, one, we're dealing with Libras and Scorpios. We're dealing with party people. That's number one. And number two is because the veil is thin, holiday seasons are coming, it's getting crispy. We're getting to the back into the party season after a little bit of a break. So I think people are going to be like, oh, like this fall, and we'll see what November's cards are, but like I can already tell what this fall is. I should have known when I read November's cards what kind of fall we were going to have. But it's like we get into the season time and everyone's feeling like a little bit more willing to be communicative and chipper, or pretend that they are. And all these feelings, instead of being expressed, like in the 10 of Swords, when you're like, I'm injured here and I need help, are instead going to buckle down. Like I can speak for my month. I've had a very broke November, and I am set up to have a very flush October. So it's very easy to go from feast to famine and be like, okay, well, I'll go back to planning my life in this post-apocalyptic society, and I'm going to go plan my next 5 years, even though climate change is pretty much guaranteeing you're not going to be able to live any one place. And so this is kind of a thinking that things are returning to normal, which is kind of funny. Because this is October's reading, because it's all air and it's all thoughts and feelings, not because of the cards I pull, by the way, but because Libra and Scorpio. And then, of course, we know Scorpio is the most like cerebral water sign. Scorpions don't swim. So we know that the Scorpios have a lot of thoughts. We know the Libras have a lot of thoughts. So there's going to be a lot of thinking. And why I know that is because the Advantage Aversion card is, shockingly, the Six of Wands. So, of course, if you feel within yourself like you have had a temporary victory, right? Because this is what Corinna, Rosella, and I were talking about. It's like the Five of Wands, you're like, are they friends or foes? The Six of Wands, you're marching into town. People are celebrating you. You like did something you said you were going to do. Temporary victory. By the time we get to the Seven of Wands, you back on the defensive. You walked through the town, you went home and you locked your door. It was a parade for you, but you went home and locked the door. And then you get to 8 and you're like, everybody is around me, assailing me. And then you get to 9 and this motherfucker's really ready to fight. And then by 10, they have all the staffs of everybody whose ass they beat and they're walking somewhere crazy. So, and then we get to the Knight, of Wands, who I think Corinna accurately calls the most dangerous card in the tarot. The most dangerous character in the deck is the Knight of Wands. So when we see the Six of Wands coming from internal, it's like something happens to sort of satiate you. You feel good for a minute, consolation prize, circumstances. So, or, let me not be so. Let me be neutral. You get a break, right? You get a little moment from this. You get a little victory, a little, what did my anonymous question say? Attain ego boost, a little ego boost, okay? The person who was talking all that mess about you fell on their face in public and everybody found out they was a liar and you were like, oh, did that happen? Oh, that's so terrible. But then we're stuck here because the reality between these two cards is that compassion says this motherfucker still fell on their face. There's still people who fall on their face in the world, and we can't even have compassion for them. We're just waiting. We're waiting for them to fall. So between this card, which is kind of like temporary victory, temporary gains, false victory, the appearance of, or even being celebrated, let's say, by the wrong side. Because I think sometimes when I was talking to Corinne Rosella in the podcast we just did about tarot for how to survive climate collapse in a post-COVID world, we were talking about how, you know, maybe the Five of Wands, you think you're falling in with the right folk. You're like, I finally found my people. Six of Wands, you are on the high of the group. And then by Seven of Wands, you're kind of like, are these motherfuckers, did they say Nazis? Because I got really excited for a minute because I was like, I'm safe. But then I was like, because I'm with danger. So it's like, are you with the danger? Because that's usually where this victory is. Like, did you come home to, are you Alibaba and you came home to the 40 thieves and they're all happy because you done robbed and pillaged and raped? It's very much that question. And then the question, because this is how we deal with the outside world between these two things, is that, you know, maybe you're taking a moment to reflect. Maybe you're taking longer than you need or longer than you should to do what you know you need to do. Maybe you're like, I'm just going to give myself October and then I'm going to tell all those bitches what it is in November. You know, maybe you're just giving yourself a break. But this is very much a card reading that says October is going to be a lot of feelings, a lot of words about feelings, and a lot, because this didn't end up coming up cups, because it would have been different if we was talking Six of Cups energy inside, then that'd kind of be worse because we'd be in the naivete. But this is more about like, okay, do I want small victories in my life, or do I want legendary victories in my life? You know, like, how big fish, small pond. Like, how many times can you be celebrated coming back to the same people who've never done anything? It's like, why wouldn't they say that? I love it. I love a relevant one. So it's like, when you know you've outgrown something, but you drag in defeats, and you're hoping, this is the hope, that you're dragging the feet at a sustainable pace, because the feet can drag you. That's what we do know. Like, you could be taken like the hang person. Motherfucker. You could be taken up like the hang person and just be taken up by the foot. I was just writing about the name James, meaning to be supplanted by the heel. Literally, the name's meaning to be taken up by the foot. And which we also think about Chiron, of course, because the wounded healer. Pun not intended. It was just a funny thing that happened in English, because those aren't the words in Greek. But like, the wounded healer, to the point that's like, the one thing you are neglecting to think about in thinking that everything is appeased. Because I mean, definitely going through here, we're talking about like manic mania and depression. We're talking about high highs and low lows over here. This is not a stable state of being. Okay. And then, but this is a quiet card. And it's certainly better than the Seven of Swords. I'm glad you ain't straight up lying, but like, or stealing and cheating. But this is just like, okay, I know I need to get out of these bounds, but I'm just going to stand here for a minute. I'm just going to wait here for a little bit until I have to, you know, maybe you're waiting for the weather to get worse. And I talk a lot about this because obviously, and I'll see what our key card is, but like, obviously, okay, no deck of character today. Actually, there'll be deck of character. We are in a nihilistic Machiavellian society. Yeah, of course, negative stimulation and negative affirmation is how we learn. Like, we wouldn't have supremacy ideation. We wouldn't have patriarchy. We wouldn't have classism if we didn't choose to learn through negative stimulation. No, at no point did Earth say, and now divide yourselves. It was a choice. So that's the case. That being said, we do not, I think a sign of true healing and maturity is when you do not need negative stimulus to do what you need to do. Because in a utopian world, it's not that we don't have differences and we don't have antagonisms. It's that, well, we just don't kill each other over them. We also can say that and move on with our lives, knowing that that's perfectly acceptable. But also we move on quicker from things that aren't for us, and we don't wait until they're against us, you know? So it's like, even when you're in that neutral place with your job where you're like, yep, I need to quit this motherfucker. Like, they already can't pay me enough to be here. Like, I'm already, as soon as I walk in the door, I'm checked out. And then I have 8 hours until I literally get to check out. So if you already know you're in that state of being, don't wait until you have what they called in my job compassion fatigue, because I was the complaints department. And I remember at one point someone called me whose animal had died, and they were like cussing me up all up, down, and sideways. And I was like, I did not kill your cat, ma'am. And I know my boss pulled me in later, and she's like, saying you, she's from Texas, saying you, there's a thing in our business. It's called compassion fatigue, and I think you have it. And I was like, yeah, because this is my last 2 weeks, bitch. Like, leave me alone. I didn't kill your cat. But don't let it go that far, right? Like, don't let it go to the Jerry Maguire moment, because it will. Trust that spirit will move you to the Jerry Maguire moment and have you looking like a whole lonesome writer in your workplace or in your relationship quitting, or in a friendship quitting, in a restaurant quitting, in a group quitting. Talking about who's going to come with me, walking out, not even with Renee Zellweger, walking out by yourself. And so I just think when we come into our healthiness and our dynamic neutrality, we don't need to push it to the edge to know that it's time to go or turn around. Like, we do not need to exhaust or break ourselves in order to know that we deserve to go in the direction that we prefer, even if it's not the direction that we're going in. So the moment that you know, like, the most responsible card, shockingly, in the Koa is this one. Because this person is at least contemplating the circumstances. This person thinks they know everything. This person thinks there's nothing left to know. So you might as well take the moment to really plan your exits. Pretty exits. You know, if we get to succeed beautifully and fail beautifully, we also get to exit dramatically, effectively. Not just dramatic arrivals, but dramatic exits, which is just to say a good show. That can be a good neutral show. Like, I planned it. I gave you all the 6 weeks notice. I got another job. I decided I was leaving in December, not during Mercury retrograde, which is another reason why we might be pausing in October and not mincing the words in case we fuck them up. So it's like, if you just know and you're biding your time with care and with the thought to long-term sustainability and not just looking victorious, not just feeling good in the moment, then you're in a situation where you can use October to get ahead. But if you use October to deny the circumstances, the emotional recognition of the circumstances, which then allow you to bring around the intellect to address the emotional circumstances, then you're going to be in a position where in November, we're going to be right back here. And if anything, maybe just jump all the way up to the 10s, or to the 10s or the 8s, which is like everything is coming at me at once. So let's see what our T card says.